Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. I am Fred Feliciano, the CEO of Critical Conversations HR. If you're joining me live, welcome and welcome from beautiful Naples, Florida. Today, we will be going over keep workplaces politics free in 2024. Okay, so in terms of keeping workplaces politics free in 2024, uh, there's nothing more polarizing than discussing politics, discussing the current election. There are some topics you want to avoid in the workplace. For example, religion, money, sex, and the topic of this live stream, politics. Politics is just a natural divider. It's one of those things that will end relationships with people, will cause a big, grift with someone. Um, it's also something that makes people very, very, very uncomfortable discussing. Okay. And another reason why people feel very uncomfortable discussing this is that most people have a false sense of confidence in the area of politics. Another reason why you want to avoid discussing politics in the workplace is because people will feel alienated. Ultimately, uh, we have a two-party system in the U.S. of A. And if you're advocating for one side, the other side will feel alienated, regardless of whether you're advocating for, the Republican Party versus the Democratic Party. Ultimately, you will have people that are of the opposing party. So, therefore, if you're advocating for a specific candidate, unless you're a 501c3 that its foundation is in politics, um, you don't want to go in that direction because people will feel alienated. And then also, although political affiliation is not a federally protected, protected class, people will feel quote unquote retaliated if they express their views that they belong to a certain political party or have beliefs, and ultimately they're disciplined, and you need to terminate someone. They will feel that you've done it because of their political beliefs, and that they will feel that they're a victim of retaliation. More reasons why not to discuss politics, or to keep your workplaces politics free, is that I've mentioned this before. Relationships change when you get into these I'm sorry, when you get into these discussions with people, especially coworkers or even family members. Relationships change, and how you view them changes based on who they vote for. Also, talking about politics and volunteering that up, it's really TMI, too much information. The majority of the time, your coworkers don't care about who you vote for, what you believe politically, uh, what you worship. They care about getting the job done. They care about making it through the shift. And there's going to be tension if politics are offered up, and the person does not agree. So TMI, too much information, is especially worse when it's unsolicited and people begin to offer up their opinions on politics and candidates. And ultimately, you will have some biases. There will be biases against people. And it's very rare that people can truly work together, supervise individuals, and not have those biases in check. And we see that in workplaces today, that biases are eminent. They do come out. So in terms of my overall message today, both for employers and for employees, it's stop being delusional. Okay. um, so the employer delusion is that employers, they may have a legal right to regulate communication. It's really something that is extremely hard to do if your intention is to have zero conversation about politics in the workplace and try to push that onto your employees. Can you have policies regarding language? Yes, you can. For example, I worked for an organization that had a policy that said you cannot call illegal immigrants illegal immigrants. Instead, you had to use the terminology undocumented individuals. Do I personally believe in that? Do I think I should not use illegal immigrants? Absolutely not. I don't believe that, but that's a policy that your employer may have, and they have a right to dictate that language. They have a right to dictate your behavior. They also have a right to dictate language and communication in the workplace. Also, what employers can regulate are policies regarding dress attire. For example, it's possible to have a policy that state that you can't wear any clothing that is advocating for one political candidate versus another. That is legal to do, all depending on the state. Most states do not have any sort of statutes in place protecting that right of speech. Also, attempting to dictate freedom of speech is not realistic, and in fact we see it backfiring in many places. So the employer delusion. Another major part of the employer delusion is that I see that some employers claim to be not nonpartisan. Actually, like for example, during the Trump presidency in 2016, there were employers that actually dispatched employee assistance programs for crisis counseling to deal with those employees who had a tough time with Trump being elected. In addition to that, we had CEOs and executive directors offering up communication, speaking about condolences, and obviously, if you're claiming to be nonpartisan, offering up an employee assistance program because Trump got elected is ridiculous. You're partisan. You're partisan. If you're offering up a mass email to all of your employees offering condolences that Trump won, you're obviously partisan. And my belief is that there's no need for that. There's no need to be pushing your own political agenda on your employees. Also, if any of those actions were done, you are actually partisan. So stop the delusion. Stop speaking about your nonpartisan when you're obviously pushing one political candidate over another. Basically, your employees are not being fooled. Okay. And most employees are not going to confront this issue in the workplace because they fear retaliation. And many people overall fear conflict. So what I do advise employers to do is acknowledge that tensions may run high. People have fears, but do not connect those fears to one specific candidate. What we saw back in 2016 was a constant fear mongering, all based on one side, based on one political candidate. What you can do is have a general statement about politics and speak about everyone should feel safe, welcomed, and respected. In my opinion, the true measurement of relationships is not when things are going well, is when things are not going well and you have disagreements. That's the judge or that's the true measure of a relationship, or when things are not going well, that is when you see the foundation of that relationship, how strong that is, and how you deal with conflict. So we want to ensure that if you are an employer, you do have a policy that speaks about having a safe and welcoming atmosphere for everyone, regardless of your political affiliations or what you believe. So I spoke a little bit about policies, and what employers can do is encourage, voting, offer flexibility for voting. You can have a policy in terms of refraining from political statements and dress attire. The employer has their right to dictate that. And also, you can remind your employees about the code of conduct. And lastly, many employers don't have this, but there needs to be a certain level of emotional intelligence. I call it reading the room, getting a sense or a pulse of the organization. I've had many associates who've been absolutely disgusted with what's going on in terms of workplaces and policies and organizations saying that they're nonpartisan when they're clearly not, and pushing political agendas and political candidates is really disturbing. So my message for employees, also to stop being delusional. Stop the delusion. So I can't say everyone, obviously I can't make these blanket statements, but in the world of work, there's typically a lack of emotional intelligence and an inability to read the room. Many people claim to be open-minded, but they're not. Okay. And typically, when you challenge people with a different worldview, there's two types of responses. Actually, I would probably say three. There's, a fight response. People get offended. They can't believe that you have a different opinion or you don't support their political candidate, and they're offended by it. You're shattering their worldview. They're sensitive, and they're truly not open to a change of opinion. The other response is flight. People just run away, or they shut down. And in a lot of cases, flight and shutting down is better than actually fighting and getting offended and yelling, because that's not behavior you want in the workplace. But as a result of people flighting and shutting down, that obviously is going to create some animosity among people in your workplace. Actually, let me go back to something very quickly. In terms of the inability to read the room and people claiming to be open-minded, sometimes we find that people don't really want to have a conversation about anything. It's funny because I was in a Panera Bread yesterday, and there's a gentleman there who's very eccentric, and he was having a conversation with another individual, and he was talking and talking loudly about the horrible traffic and bike riders not being protected here in Naples. And he just went on and on and on and on and on. And the person sitting down listening wasn't even making eye contact, was not going back and forth with the gentleman. And this went on for about 5 minutes. And that's how I see, people in politics a lot of the time, that they just want to verbally vomit on you, and they're not really interested in an exchange of ideas, or a difference of opinion. So, dues for the employee. And again, I would recommend people do not have conversations about politics in the workplace. Excuse me. So typically what I do, if people engage me and I know they have a difference of opinion, I will ask them and say and ask, listen, are you open to hearing something different? If they say yes, that really opens up the door. It's still it is still risky, but it's still something that I will ask, because I personally don't believe in hiding my opinions per se. Um, especially if there's a conversation and there's a dialogue and the person seems open to it. So, but in terms of employees, I tell employees in your communication, listen to understand. Truly, people typically listen just to respond back. They don't really listen to understand another person's point of view. And people just want to really argue and spit out these talking points. And that's really a result of the culture. If you look at, these cable news networks, and then you have these two opposing forces speaking to each other. They're on there for less than 3 minutes, and they give person A 20 seconds and person B has 20 seconds to respond. It's really not opening up the floor for dialogue. It's just opening up the floor for people throwing, spears at each other, and hopefully it catches the person. It's not really open communication. So I'm not really a big fan of the cable news networks when they don't do long form content like what you're able to find on YouTube. So communication dues. I mentioned this before. Don't share unless asked to or have agreement from the other person. Um, I also will throw in there are in terms of not initiating political communication. And I typically will ask someone, are you open to a difference of opinion? Just so that I have permission to offer up an opposing viewpoint if there are an opposing viewpoint. But ultimately, I believe politics should stay out of the workplace. So it has been a pleasure sharing with you my thoughts about keeping workplaces politics free. Again, I am Fred Feliciano, the CEO of Critical Conversations HR. If you are dealing with a workplace situation that you need assistance with and need a consultation, feel free to reach out to me. My information has been scrolling down below. Thank you. I appreciate you watching this video. Take care and stay safe.